It was a long time coming, but we're finally here. It's about time I put my dick on the table with this whole Family Guy thing. What is the worst episode you've ever seen? Allow me to set the stage for you. This would have been about fall of 2018. The girl I loved had just recently left me and found someone else. My job was at stake, and with all of this stress and some other stuff on the side, I just kind of became a bitter, angry, depressed asshole. And then, from the heavens, descends my friend Digley on Discord, who thought it would be a funny idea to watch the season 17 premiere. A two-parter involving the wacky hijinks of funny man Seth MacFarlane's self-insert marrying a woman while his other self-insert makes out with his brother. And it was at that point I finally fucking snapped. I had found the worst Family Guy experience I've ever had. Dead Dog Walking is my least favorite episode of Family Guy, and it was all caused by funny man Seth MacFarlane. Now, I was originally going to be discussing both this episode and the one that came before it, since they're a two-parter, but I realized that I had way more issues with this episode since it closely embodies everything that I hate about Family Guy. And that's such a difficult thing to say, since I used to be such a huge fan of this series. This was one of my favorite shows over 14 years ago. I used to sneak into the living room late at night and watch the show when everyone was asleep. I cried when I figured out I couldn't play the Family Guy MMO because it was discontinued, and then I beat the Family Guy video game like 5 times. It's really embarrassing now that I say this all out loud. I never really considered until just recently how much I used to love Family Guy and how invested I was in discussing this topic. And I'll save you all the bullshit about how Family Guy had started to suck after about 3 or 4 seasons, because I don't really think Family Guy was anything terrible until maybe like a few seasons ago. If anything, I felt Family Guy's first 4 seasons were pretty good, and then it just slowly went from being serviceable to nothing really all that interesting. Even all of those episodes that people normally put on their worst list don't really bother me, just because it was at a time when it was all just bland bullshit. It really didn't irritate me until just recently. Probably because of how this style stagnated in a mediocrity. Now it's just plain bad. And Dead Dog Walking is not only the worst episode I've seen, but it perfectly embodies everything I hate about current Family Guy. Now, as I mentioned before, this is the second part to a 2-parter, so I'll run you through what happened in the episode before, called Married with Cancer. Brian meets a woman named Jess who is diagnosed with cancer and decides to help her complete her sex bucket list. Eventually, she discovers that she's going to die, so Brian decides to marry her and be with her for her final days. His love story becomes the talk of the town, and plenty of women want to sleep with him after Jess dies, and Brian is hoping for that to be the case as well. Though when they get married, at the very last second, the doctor rushes in to tell Jess that she's going to survive, so looks like Brian's stuck on the deal for this one. She suddenly becomes fat, has a lot of cats, farts a lot, has a mom that farts a lot too, and well, obviously Brian is miserable. And then during a lunch date, Jess begins choking to death on some food, and Brian doesn't really do much to save her, so she dies. But not really though, because she comes back to life at the last second. Yeah, it's a weird episode, and it's bad too, but it follows that typical trend of Family Guy being very mean-spirited that seems to be very popular, but it didn't really harm the episode nearly as much as it did in Dead Dog Walking. So it continues with the marriage plot, but with a twist on Brian succumbing to being a lazy, passionless husband that lets himself go and no longer cares about preserving anything about himself.
Can't you hear him talking about you? Yeah, I'm a dog. I can hear everything.
However, he ends up injuring himself and Jess decides to take care of him like any good wife would, but Brian ends up being very high maintenance for her. And then I called up funny man Seth MacFarlane and I was like, dude, this shit's fucking boring. Why can't you make it funny, dude? And then funny man was all like, yo, I got you, not funny internet man, yo. And then he made some changes to the script and suddenly she decides to have Brian euthanized. Wait a minute, what?
This is the Pound. You're being euthanized.
What?
Yeah, Jess turns out to be a piece of shit too, but it gets much better, trust me. Apparently this and Brian not saving Jess at the Mexican restaurant is supposed to be an allegory for marriage?
I mean, gosh, maybe that's what true marriage is. 2 people who want each other to die.
Yeah, sure. I guess the Dahlia Dippolito approach was the best form of marriage counseling one could ask for.
I mean, for killing somebody, come on. Nobody's gonna be able to point a finger at me.
I guess what didn't work for her will work for a bestiality marriage any day. Funny man Seth MacFarlane saves the day again. And in typical Family Guy funny moment fashion, this episode has a B-plot. To complement the ever-so-amazing tale of a failing homicidal marriage, we have Stewie and Chris vaping. Yeah, Family Guy wanted to make a statement about vaping. in 2018, years after everyone else called vaping out for being pussy-ass shit.
Smoking is for losers. Vaping is for douchebags.
Aw, I want to be a douchebag.
And that's just the whole subplot. It's one of those subplots where Family Guy is trying to make a statement about something, yet, like I said earlier, they're years late to the punch. I know you see those shitty anti-vape adverts everywhere, but everyone knows that vapes are a meme at this point. No one takes them seriously, and everyone already knows that these people are fucking pretentious anyway, so... Oh shit, I almost forgot the part where Lois takes away Stewie's vape pen, and then he tries to fight Chris for his. On my first viewing, this is about where I lost my shit. Not because of the kissing itself, because let's face it, this isn't the worst thing Family Guy's ever done. I mean, at one point, all of the Griffin kids have tried to do something sexually with the dog at least once. Meg tried to fuck him, Chris got herpes from him, Stewie got pregnant with his kids. He also got herpes from him. It's like a show secretly made to cater to those furry zoophiles since they get the best possible representation from a famous animated show where every woman is just cool having sex with dogs? I'm sorry for opening up that Pandora's box. Now we're never gonna hear the end of that shit. Nah, I just gave up because I thought this was just a shock humor vibe. Like, they just threw this in because the shock value would be funny. We're gonna take the Kramer approach, and holy shit, it didn't work there either. Or maybe Funny Man Seth MacFarlane is just so done with his show that he thought this would offend the normies who haven't been watching the show for 17 seasons and are already desensitized to this type of humor. Either way, it felt desperate and really didn't pay off as a gamble. It's not funny, and even with everything in this episode that I still need to touch up on, it just makes me even more agitated. This B-plot wraps up with Lois trying to prove that Chris is a douchebag for vaping, which, you know, still isn't funny, but in that split second you could feel the entire liberal population of Oregon become offended all at once, so maybe it was worth it all along. Now, the A and B plot themselves really aren't the biggest problem, since an absurd plot is very beneficial for a show like this. It's really just the tone that makes it so unbearable. Everyone is just a piece of shit, and everything is so mean-spirited, it just doesn't suit what they're trying to go for. And that would seem hypocritical on the surface, since I love a lot of shows with characters that are just heavily exaggerated and selfish. Always Sunny and South Park and a lot of other shows come to mind, but there are two things that separate shows like that from Family Guy: good comedy and a consistent tone. Good comedy is the essence for making this style work because these are such exaggerated characters. Having them be completely inhumane and terrible just isn't enough to carry a show, and that's where Family Guy started to suffer in these more recent seasons. Original Family Guy had it on the nose originally. Everyone had their serious flaws, like Lois was short-tempered and Stewie was just having this sociopathic, evil genius vibe. But it wasn't ever excessive, and it was balanced by the humor that they had going on at the time. Now everyone is just a sociopath, and it's not supported by anything funny. And well, let's use this episode as an example. In this episode, a lot of the humor comes from pure non sequiturs.
Because I'm not a Skidmore freshman at a Lake George share house. Or am I? But the water was too shallow. Bryce broke his neck and never walked again. This put an end to off-campus drinking and lake house rentals. I was just fine. I landed on Bryce.
And a lot of random referential gags that aren't funny.
Ah! Come back here, you. Giggity, giggity, crabbity, giggity.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
Oh, now you're getting euthanized for sure.
Even the cutaway gags themselves are just lazy and confusing.
We're gonna have a great adventure, like the astronaut who thinks the lowest number is 3.
And liftoff in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Liftoff.
And not to mention this montage segment. Over a minute of 3 individual skits. Usually the point of these, especially in Family Guy, is to just make quick jokes by having multiple little funny skits. This one amounts to watching Jess try to open a garbage bag and failing for over 30 seconds, a quick clip of them on a dinner date, and then Jess hiring backup dancers to simulate the illusion of movement that goes on for another 30 seconds. Jokes that are not only not funny, but go on way longer than than they need to. Which brings me to the consistent tone issue. When I started writing, I couldn't put a finger on why I found the older seasons to be funnier, since there are still some similar comedic styles and how the jokes are delivered. So I went back and watched a few random episodes from season 2. The differences between these episodes and every other I remember seeing lately became very apparent very quickly. For one, I actually laughed more than once. And I also just noticed that older Family Guy had a whole slew of jokes, rapid firing them but didn't linger on them for too long. They were very quick, well written, and sometimes unpredictable.
You know, guys, I don't say this often enough, but I'm gonna die.
Daddy, can I come with you?
Ask your mother.
Sir, that casket costs $1,000.
Okay, $70.
What?
$2,000.
That's twice what it costs.
$40.
What?
He doesn't know how to haggle.
This way the humor works, but if there is a joke that you didn't like, then you didn't have to put up with it for too long because it left almost as soon as it arrived. Or the ones that did linger a bit are offset by having a consistent flow of good jokes coming in. Like I said, there are still some similar writing styles to this and New Family Guy, but one of the single biggest themes with newer Family Guy episodes is the opposite of what made it so entertaining. A lot of the humor involves stretching out the joke for way too long, going into lengthy non sequiturs and cutaway gags, or even just explaining the joke. Explaining the joke is so fucking common in these episodes. You know, the one thing that almost always ruins something being funny?
I'm not good at the football part.
And another thing I noticed is that older Family Guy's cast had vastly different personalities. Now there are some funnier changes now, like how Stewie is just a sassy bitch and how Chris is a chronic masturbator, so it's not like I'm apprehensive to the changes they made, since it made one really annoying, gimmicky character into the only reason I'll still tune in every now and then. But part of the humor of someone like, say, Lois is that she was a pretty simple housewife with occasional impulse control, and Peter was still a bit of an asshole, but was a well-meaning idiot at the same time. Someone who fucked up a lot and ruined everything, but still cared about people. He just, well, was pretty selfish. He was still pretty selfish and thought a lot about himself, but, you know, realized his problems in the end. The good humor helped to make the exaggerated and sometimes mean-spirited moments shine better. Having a balance between a consistent tone and a consistent comedic styling is the essence of making a show like this work. And I'm not saying that these characters can't be terrible people either. In fact, this is why I hold something like American Dad in higher esteem. The characters from the start of the show were always pretty selfish and unflinching, but they also had different personality types that contribute to funny chemistry between the whole cast.
Stan, Haley's been shot!
So what? She shot me before. I've shot you a couple times. Everybody shoots everybody. It's how we communicate in this family.
All right, I'll tell her you asked about her.
You tell her whatever you want, but that's not how it went down.
They don't have cutaway gags either, so the episodes are all about their own character interactions and plots. The comedy and the characters are well written, and despite some episodes that flop, the show still had that perfect balance of good comedy and stayed consistent with their darker and mean-spirited tone. So many other adult animated shows do this, and this is why I hate New Family Guy. I know people really hate episodes like Seahorse Seashell Party or even Screams of Silence for mishandling super heavy topics like abuse, and I completely accept your reasoning on that, nor do I think you're wrong to hate them for it. However, to me, those episodes just existed at a time when I felt Family Guy was just mediocre, nothing special, it just existed. The worst it was just acceptable background noise. Now it's just not fun watching a show that's trying too hard to disgust you. Something trying too hard to shock you with these characters that do terrible things and consistently make it unfunny and lazily written. Drawing out jokes, explaining jokes, making really long and unfunny non-sequitorial cutaways, and a really lazy B-plot that's way too late to the punch, and shock humor for the sake of shock humor. The crutch of a show with so few ideas left. And this is the lowest point for me. Never in an episode have I had to endure the worst of all of these before, all at once. Nothing was well done, and it embodies really just everything I hate about this show and what it's become. I understand if people disagree just for that reason, but if you do disagree, then leave in the comments section what episode you think is the worst. I already talked with a few people about it since I announced it on Twitter, and I had some interesting responses. Some of them I still do agree with. They're pretty bad episodes. But I'm glad I was able to get this out there, and I hope you guys have a good day.